This is the lecture for European history for Monday, the 2nd of November, 2020, the day before Election Day. Okay. We have taken this war of religion thing up to its final moment, almost up to its final moment. We talked about the defeat of the Spanish Armada, how the Armada went up the English Channel with its galleons and galleasses, large, short-range, unmaneuverable craft, or short-range weapons designed for boarding, and how they were fought by lighter, more caravel-built British vessels with longer-range cannon, who could dance around the edge of the Spanish, outmaneuver them, and pepper them with fire. How at night the Spaniards were enraged by the fire ships that the British sent into their ranks, and how ultimately, by losing their focus and focusing on the British fleet that was just driving them mad in front of them, they missed their exit to pick up the army in the Netherlands to invade England. So the decision was made by the Duke of Medina Sidonia to go around the British Isles and try again. But by the time they reached Scottish waters, the storm season had hit, and most of the fleet was destroyed. Now, some of the ships crashed on the shores of Ireland, and the crews were murdered by Irishmen, and other ships crashed on the shores of Ireland, and their crews were hidden by sympathetic Catholic Irishmen. One of my ancestors was one of those, because after the time of the Spanish Armada, a new type of Irish physical characteristic developed, called the Black Irish, and my grandmother was one of these. Pale-skinned, but very dark-eyed, very dark-haired, indicating Spanish blood. And that's at least a quarter of my heritage. So somewhere in the past, a member of the Spanish Armada was one of my ancestors. I just think that's interesting. The surviving few, and I mean very few ships, that made it back to Cadiz were in no business to cause anyone any problems except the King of Spain. The invasion had failed. England would remain Catholic. Philip II was frustrated, but the Invincible Armada was vinced by the English, and especially by the weather. So, where do the wars of religion go from here? Well, the French wars of religion play out with the Edict of Nantes, the Edict of Toleration of the Huguenots, the French Calvinists. However, in the Holy Roman Empire, things are going to take a turn for the worst, and I mean the worst of the religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries, of the 15 and 1600s, which is going to become the 30 Years' War. One of the linked images that should be attached to this lesson is a woodcut of the defenestration of Prague. Let me explain, because this is a causal factor to the 30 Years' War. Bohemia is part of the Holy Roman Empire, but it's not German. It's Czech, and the Czechs are a particular form of Slavs that have been very much part of Central European history for a very long time. And as in other places, in Bohemia, there were religious difficulties that were being expressed politically. In fact, remember, Bohemia was one of the locations of the Hussite Wars. So there's a lot of very fresh wounds there. The empire, under an aggressive emperor who wants to make sure everyone knows how Catholic he is, decides to put pressure on the Protestant churches in Bohemia. He's going to turn up the volume. And a few imperial representatives are sent to Prague, the capital of Czechia today, the capital of Bohemia then and now, in order to make sure that these policies are going to be effected with a minimum of fuss. Well, wouldn't you know it? The representatives of the Protestants are not thrilled, and they happen to be in a second or third story room. So they literally take the imperial representatives and defenestrate them. The word defenestrate means wing them out the window. Whee! Now, the representatives landed in a massive pile of horse hockey, a massive pile of manure, and they didn't die. But it was pretty clear that the answer of the Bohemians, at least who met with the imperial representatives, was a solid no. Well, this provokes violence, and violence begets violence, and we end up with the 30 Years' War, which you got to understand is the bloodiest war in Germany's history, except for the last 6 months of World War II. I'm not talking the bloodiest war of some pacifistic country. It's the bloodiest war in Germany's history, with the exception of the last 6 months of World War II. So, there are 4 phases to this war. The Bohemian phase, the Danish phase, the Swedish phase, and the Franco-Swedish phase. Because, yes, the Swedes get involved. In fact, everyone around the German regions of the Holy Roman Empire get involved in trying to foist their side's agents or allies to enable a victory of their allies over the enemy. Now, one of the examples of how bad this can become is with the destruction of Magdeburg, which I'm going to read to you from another support resource to the Spielvogel book, this by Candace Gregory, Documents of Western Civilization, Volume 2. I'm going to read to you the blurb first to give you an idea. Magdeburg is a city in Germany. So, 30 Years' War, destruction of Magdeburg. The 30 Years' War was the last of the religious wars of the Reformation, but was also very much a war of politics and of national interests. It was primarily fought within the Holy Roman Empire, but not exclusively. The war went through several stages. The combatants varied from place to place and decade to decade. In Bohemia, the war was fought between Catholics and Calvinists, although it was also a response to the German Habsburg dynasty's attempt to increase its power over the state. Danish Lutherans, that's in Denmark, entered the war in order to protect Protestants in Germany from attempts by the Habsburgs to re-Catholicize the German states, as they were attempting to do in Bohemia. In contrast, the war in Sweden was clearly mostly one of politics. King Gustav Adolf, Gustavus Adolphus, died 1635, used the opportunity to try and establish his kingdom's dominance over the Baltic. That includes the North German coast. The settlement to the war, the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, ensured that politics and faith would remain intertwined. The treaty allowed for individual rulers within the Holy Roman Empire to decide what would be the official faith of his own state. The following excerpt describes the massacre of Protestants in the German city of Magdeburg in 1631, which brought Gustavus Adolphus renewed determination to fight the German Catholic princes. As you listen, consider these questions. One characteristic of the war was the improvement in guns and their efficacy. How did this affect the siege of Magdeburg? So, firearms and cannons. 2, which do you think was more multinational in character, the Protestants or Catholic armies? 3, and this is at Magdeburg in 1631, what might have been the motivation for the imperial army sacking Magdeburg? Do you think it was about religion? Okay, so here's an eyewitness account of the destruction of Magdeburg in May of 1631, so it's springtime. And, again, eyewitness account. So then, General Pappenheim collected a number of his people on the ramparts by the new town, and brought them from there into the streets of the city. Von Falkenburg was shot, and fires were kindled in different quarters. Then indeed it was all over with the city, and further resistance was useless. Nevertheless, Some of the soldiers and citizens did try to make a stand here and there, but the imperial troops kept bringing on more and more forces, cavalry too to help them. And finally, they got the Krakenthor open and let the whole imperial army and the forces of the Catholic League, Hungarians, Croats, Poles, Walloons, Italians, Spaniards, French, North and South Germans into the city. Thus it came about that the city and all its inhabitants fell into the hands of the enemy, whose violence and cruelty were due in part to their common hatred of the adherents of the Augsburg Confession, and in part to their being embittered by the chain shot which had been fired at them. Chain shot is when you load your cannons not with solid balls of iron, but with chains, so that when they fire, these chains shoot off in any direction and basically rip anything in half or apart that they touch. They're completely random, and they're really, really nasty anti-personnel weapons. They're the sort of thing that get the enemy really angry at you for using them, because it's one thing to kill somebody with a musket ball or an explosive, but to rip them apart with cannon shot, which is so random and bounces, So, embittered by the chain shot which had been fired at them, and by the derisions and insults that the Magdeburgers had heaped upon them from the ramparts. You're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. Well, now the enemy's inside the gates, and it's payback time. Then was there naught but beating and burning, plundering, torture, and murder. Most especially was every one of the enemy bent on securing much booty. When a marauding party entered a house, if its master had anything to give, he might thereby purchase respite and protection for himself and his family, until the next party came, who also wanted something. It was only when everything had been brought forth, and there was nothing left to give, that the real trouble commenced. Then, what with blows and threats of shooting and stabbing and hanging, the poor people were so terrified that if they had anything left, they would have brought it forth had it been buried in the earth or hidden away in 1,000 castles. In this frenzied rage, the great and splendid city that had stood there like a fair princess in the land was now in its hour of direst need and unutterable distress and woe given over to the flames. And thousands of innocent men, women, and children, in the midst of a horrible din of heart-rending shrieks and cries, were tortured and put to death in so cruel and shameful a manner that no words would suffice to describe, nor tears to bewail it. Thus, in a single day, this noble and famous city, the pride of the whole country, went up in fire and smoke, and the remnant of its citizens with their wives and children were taken prisoners and driven away by the enemy with a noise of weeping and wailing that could be heard from afar, while the cinders and ashes from the town were carried by the wind to the entire country round. In addition to all of this, quantities of sumptuous and irreplaceable house furnishings and movable property of all kind, such as books, manuscripts, paintings, memorials of all sorts, which money could not buy, were either burned or carried away by the soldiers as booty. The most magnificent garments, hangings, silk stuffs, gold and silver lace, linens of all sorts, and other household goods were bought by the army's suitors or sutlers for a mere song and peddled by the cartload all throughout the Archbishopric of Magdeburg and in Anhalt and Brunswick. Gold chains and rings, jewels, and every kind of gold and silver utensils were to be brought from the common soldier for a tenth of their real value. So, this is a beautiful city, utterly wasted and destroyed because of this war, and it's one of many. The destruction of civil populations, total war on anything and everyone who is of the other side, adherents of the Augsburg Confessions, those are Protestants, versus the Holy League or the Catholic League, imperial troops leading the Catholic League, other members of other nationalities who are in Germany for some loot and rapine. So, the cannons are able to break down the walls and through the gates, and chain shot is used against the people of the enemy in the field, and payback will come because of that. So gunpowder does affect this. Certainly the Catholic League was more multinational at Magdeburg because the Magdeburgers were on their own against the attack, including Holy League forces from all over Europe. And the Imperial Army was clearly out for loot and treasure as much as they were out to serve the papal cause. What this all leads to, this morass of mess of murder and rape and thievery and arson and all of the poisons that lurk in the mud hatching out, is the bloodiest war in Germany's history. Again, except for the last 6 months of World War II. This has to stop. European civilization is ripping itself apart. Literally ripping itself apart. There have been religious wars in every country of one kind or another, religious-based struggles. And this is getting intense. It's getting more intense as time goes on. The religious wars are getting worse, not better. After the 30 Years' War off the continent in the British Isles, there'll be an English Civil War, which has an aspect of king versus parliament, but also has an aspect of Puritans versus Anglicans versus Catholics. So what is produced to stop these wars on the continent and to lead the way out of this endless cycle of blood and violence is the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. There's a reason why this moment ends Unit 1. Because the solution is found, and it's the same solution that the Peace of Augsburg suggested a century before. The religion of the ruler is the religion of the people. Catholic, Protestant, or Reformed. And because Reformed are included, the peace is actually maintained. The religion of the king is the religion of the people, Catholic, Protestant, or Reformed. The unity of church and state that exists in every monarchy is preserved. Both sides are preserved. The Catholics have to accept an ongoing Protestant set of Protestant denominations. The Protestants have to accept that Catholic Europe is going to remain Catholic Europe. Northern Europe is generally Protestant in Germany and Sweden and throughout Scandinavia, and Reformed in Holland and Scotland. England has mixes of both. The French have mixes of both. Parts of Germany are Reformed. But in general terms, Switzerland, in general terms, Southern Europe remains Catholic. Northern Europe is Protestant and Reformed. The religion of the king is the religion of the people. As history is an ongoing dialogue, like a tennis volley, it is this solution that our founding fathers, among others, are going to oppose during the next century in the mid to late 1700s, including during the American Revolution and tragically during the French Revolution. The rest of Unit 1 is going to deal with, and we'll deal with all of that this week, the Age of Exploration and the Scientific Revolution. Do look at the other attachments below. Thank you. See you next time.